The garden wall at the burrow had a crack in it that no one had gotten around to fixing. Harry noticed it on his third morning there, when he'd come outside before anyone else was awake and stood in the cold with a cup of tea, watching frost settle on the gnome holes. The crack ran diagonally from the third stone to the seventh, clean and precise, as though something had struck it with deliberate force. He'd considered mending it. He had the wand for it. He knew the charm. He stood there for several minutes, steam rising from his cup, and then went back inside without doing anything at all. That had been 6 weeks ago. The crack was still there. December at the burrow was a specific kind of quiet, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of a house managing itself carefully. Molly Weasley moved through its rooms with the contained efficiency of someone who had decided, without announcing it, that ordinary life would continue. Meals appeared at regular intervals, laundry dried by the fire. The wireless played at a volume low enough to be background noise and nothing more. If she noticed that Harry sometimes stood in doorways for too long before entering a room, or that Ginny occasionally set her fork down mid-meal and stared at the middle distance for a breath or two, she gave no sign of it. Arthur came and went. The ministry was reorganizing itself in layers, each department sorting through what the last year had left behind. He arrived home tired most evenings, ate without speaking much, and fell asleep in his chair by 9. Some nights, Harry heard him and Molly talking quietly in the kitchen after midnight, their voices too low to make out words. George had not come home for more than a weekend since the funeral. Bill and Fleur were at Shell Cottage. Charlie had returned to Romania. Percy was at the ministry, which was perhaps the only place any of them understood him being. Ron had gone to Australia with Hermione, which left Harry and Ginny and the burrow and the particular silence it had developed. Harry had not planned to stay this long. In the days immediately after the battle, there had been no planning of any kind, only the accumulated weight of what had happened pressing down hour by hour, and the quiet understanding among the Weasleys that he would remain until he was capable of deciding otherwise. Molly had made up the camp bed in Ron's room without asking. He'd slept in it for 3 nights before moving to the actual bed, and then for another week before he stopped waking up every 2 hours, certain something was wrong. The ministry had sent 4 owls in the first week, each bearing official correspondence that he had not opened. The prophet had run 7 front-page stories about him in 9 days. He knew this because Ginny had mentioned it once, without editorializing, as a piece of information he might want to have. He'd nodded and said nothing. He had not left the property. This was not a decision he'd made consciously. It had simply become the arrangement. He was here, and outside the low stone walls of the burrow's garden, the world had begun a process of accounting and reorganization that he had no clear role in. Inside, there was the crack in the wall and the gnome holes and Molly's cooking and Ginny. Ginny's presence at the burrow was different from his in ways he noticed but didn't examine directly. She was not hiding. That was the simplest way to put it. She moved through the house with a purposefulness that was neither loud nor performed. She helped her mother. She wrote letters. She flew circuits over the orchard on her old-school broom on the days when the weather permitted. She read. She slept regular hours. She laughed occasionally at things on the wireless. She did not appear to be waiting for anything in particular. Harry found this both reassuring and, in a way he couldn't name, quietly unnerving. They had settled into an easy closeness over the weeks, sitting together after dinner, talking about ordinary things, occasionally falling asleep on opposite ends of the sitting room sofa, without it meaning anything more than exhaustion. He thought about her more or less constantly. He was fairly certain she knew this, and had decided, with characteristic practicality, to let it exist without being addressed until he was ready to address it. She did not push. He was grateful for that. But she watched him sometimes, not with worry, exactly, and not with impatience, with attention. The way she watched a quaffle, she was calculating a move around. The ministry owls kept coming. He had developed a system of sorts. They arrived at the kitchen window, tapped 3 times, and he would take the letter, add it to a growing stack on the corner of the desk in Ron's room, and return to whatever he'd been doing. Molly had stopped commenting on the stack. Ginny had never started. The letters were, as far as he could tell from the return addresses, a mixture of formal correspondence from the ministry's new interim administration, press requests from 3 different publications, 2 letters from Gringotts regarding his account, and at least 1 from Hogwarts, the crest visible through the envelope's translucent edge. He had not opened the Hogwarts one. He wasn't sure why precisely. He told himself it was because he wasn't ready to think about what came next. Hogwarts felt like a question he didn't have an answer to yet, and he'd learned, over the past year, not to open questions he wasn't equipped to answer. It was the 2nd Thursday of December when the 2nd Hogwarts letter arrived. This one was not addressed to him. He was sitting at the kitchen table when it came. The window was already open an inch for the cold air Molly preferred while she cooked, and the owl came through it with the practiced ease of a bird that knew the house well. It landed on the table, extended its leg, and waited. The letter was addressed to Ginny. He could read the handwriting from where he sat, precise and authoritative, the letters slightly compressed, the ink a particular shade of dark blue. He recognized it without consciously meaning to. McGonagall. Ginny came in from the garden a moment later, cheeks pink from cold, pulling off her gloves. She spotted the owl, crossed to it without hurry, and untied the letter. The owl helped itself to the dish of treats Molly kept on the windowsill for exactly this purpose, and departed. Ginny read the letter standing at the counter. Harry looked at his tea. He was aware of the specific quality of his own attention, the effort of not watching her, which amounted to watching her peripherally. She read it twice. He could tell by the pause in the middle, the slight shift of weight from one foot to the other. Then she folded it along its original creases and tucked it into the pocket of her jumper. "Post," she said to no one in particular, and went to the sink to wash her hands for dinner. Molly called from the next room that the chicken would be 10 minutes. Harry looked at his tea. Ginny's voice was even. Her hands at the tap were steady. The letter sat in her pocket without comment. He looked out the kitchen window at the garden wall. The crack was still there, running diagonally from the 3rd stone to the 7th, waiting with the patience of things that don't particularly care whether they're mended or not. Dinner was ready in 8 minutes, not 10. No one mentioned the letter. That night, Harry lay in Ron's bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about the Hogwarts crest on the envelope in Ginny's pocket, and the particular way she had folded the letter back along its original creases, not hurriedly, not with drama, but with the careful deliberateness of someone who had already read it and already decided something and was simply not yet saying so. He thought about McGonagall's handwriting, the compressed letters, the dark blue ink. He thought about Hogwarts in January, the smell of the corridors, the sound of the staircases, the weight of a school bag on one shoulder on the way to a morning class. He thought about how easy it would be for that to resume, for Ginny to walk back into that, bright and capable and ready, the way she always was. He thought about the stack of unopened letters on Ron's desk. He did not sleep for some time. Outside, the frost was settling again on the garden, and the crack in the wall remained where it had always been, patient and undemanding, waiting for no one in particular. The letter appeared at breakfast the next morning. Not literally. It was still in Ginny's pocket, presumably, or perhaps moved to her room overnight. But its presence was there at the table as surely as the toast rack and the marmalade and the pot of tea Molly had set in the centre with the efficiency of long habit. Harry felt it the moment he sat down. Ginny was already at the table, eating without hurry, reading a back issue of Witch Broomstick that had been circulating through the sitting room for the better part of 2 weeks. She did not look up when he came in. He poured his tea. Arthur had already left. His chair was pushed in with the particular precision of someone who'd been awake since 5 and had several things to manage before arriving at an office that was currently managing several hundred things simultaneously. Molly was at the stove, turning something over in a pan with a focus she applied equally to cooking and to conversations she had decided not to have. Harry ate his eggs. The wireless was on. The morning program, news and commentary. A voice reading out names of committees being formed and buildings being assessed, and systems being reviewed. The reconstruction had its own vocabulary now, a specific set of words that appeared in every broadcast: interim, reinstated, under review, pending assessment. The war had ended and immediately become administrative. He listened without meaning to. It was hard not to. Ginny turned a page. The Witch Broomstick was 3 months old, and she had almost certainly read it already. He'd seen it on the arm of the sofa for the better part of a week, but she held it with apparent interest, her toast half-eaten beside her plate, her tea going faintly cool in the way that tea did when someone was more occupied with something else. He watched her, briefly, from across the table. She had her mother's quality of stillness when she was thinking. Not blankness, but a kind of contained focus. All of her attention turned inward, towards something she wasn't yet ready to put into words. He'd noticed it more over the past weeks. The way she could be present in a room and simultaneously somewhere else entirely, working through something with a methodical patience that reminded him, oddly, of how she approached a difficult flying maneuver, calculating the angles before committing to the move. He looked at his eggs. The wireless said something about the Hogwarts Board of Governors convening in January for the first formal session since the school's reopening. Ginny turned another page without any visible reaction. Molly adjusted the heat on the stove. McGonagall wrote, Ginny said. She said it the way she said most things, plainly, without preamble, as if they were continuing a conversation that had been running quietly in the background. She set the magazine down and picked up her toast. "I know," Harry said. "I saw the owl." She nodded. "She's asking whether I want to come back for the January term." A pause. "Apparently, they're offering it to all the students who had their 7th year disrupted. Proper exams in June, same as any other year." Harry said, "Oh." "NEWTS would count," Ginny continued, "for anything I wanted to do afterward." "Right." She took a bite of toast, chewed, swallowed. "I want to go." The words were matter-of-fact. She hadn't asked. She hadn't framed it as a question or a proposal or something requiring his input. She had said it the way she said most true things, directly, without decoration, as a fact she had already arrived at and was now simply making him aware of. He said, "Okay." She looked at him then, briefly. He had the distinct impression she was reading the difference between what he'd said and what he'd meant. She had always been able to do that. It was not always comfortable. "Okay," she said. She picked up the magazine again. Molly moved the pan off the heat and turned to face the room, apparently to ask whether anyone wanted more eggs. She looked at Harry. She looked at Ginny. She put the pan on the rack and said that there was more toast if anyone wanted it, and returned to the sink. Harry drank his tea. He thought about it for the rest of the morning. Not the conversation, which had been brief enough that calling it a conversation was perhaps generous, but the thing underneath it. The thing he hadn't said, which had sat in his chest like a stone, while Ginny talked about NEWTS and June exams and anything I wanted to do afterward, as though the future were a simple and navigable territory she had already begun to map. He went outside after breakfast and stood in the garden. The frost had softened overnight, but the air was still sharp, carrying that particular winter smell of cold earth and dormant things. He walked the perimeter of the garden, hands in his jacket pockets, following the low stone wall until he reached the crack. 3rd stone to the 7th, diagonal, patient, and stopped. Hogwarts in January. He tried to picture it, the corridors with their familiar weight of history, the staircases shifting, the smell of potions coming from the dungeons, the particular quality of winter light through the great hall's enchanted ceiling. He tried to picture Ginny there, in the middle of all of it, a 7th year student moving through her days, sitting OWL preparations, flying for the team, laughing with friends he barely knew in corridors he associated with things he was still trying to put in order. He tried to picture himself there. The picture didn't form. He had been invited back, technically. He knew this from the envelope, with the Hogwarts crest that was still sitting on Ron's desk, unopened. It was, he suspected, the same offer McGonagall had extended to Ginny, a chance to complete the 7th year properly, to sit the exams, to have the credentials, rather than just the outcome. He had not opened the letter. He had told himself this was because he wasn't ready to think about what came next. He'd been telling himself this for 6 weeks. Standing at the wall, with the frost-softened ground under his boots and the crack in the stone at eye level, he acknowledged, without particular comfort, that this was not entirely accurate. He wasn't opening the letter because opening it would require him to answer a question he did not know how to answer yet. And the question was not whether he wanted to return to Hogwarts. It was something more specific than that, and more complicated, and he hadn't found language for it that didn't sound like something he was ashamed of. He touched the crack in the wall with one finger. The stone was cold and slightly damp. He went back inside. That afternoon, 3 more owls arrived. The first was Ministry. He recognized the seal before it even landed and set it on the pile without looking at the return address. The second was from Hermione, addressed to both him and Ginny. A long letter from Australia covering 7 pages in her closely written hand. He read the first page, understood she and Ron were well, and that her parents' memories were slowly, carefully being restored, and felt something release fractionally in his chest that he hadn't realized had been held tight. The third owl was small and slightly disheveled, and delivered a note from George consisting of 4 words, still breathing. "You?" Harry wrote back, "Same. You okay?" He sent it without waiting for an answer he suspected might not come quickly. The Ministry owls had begun to accumulate a specific urgency. He could tell this not from reading them, but from the frequency. The same official seal appearing every 2 or 3 days now, sometimes twice in one morning. The interim administration, from what he gathered from Arthur's careful, measured dinner-time mentions, was in the early stages of a significant reorganization. Several departments, several positions, several things that, apparently, had his name attached to them in ways he had not been consulted about. Arthur had told him this quietly, on the 3rd day of December, standing in the garden while Molly was busy inside. He'd been careful about it, the particular care of someone who understood exactly what he was saying and wanted to make sure it landed without pressure. He said the Ministry would want to speak with him when Harry was ready. He said when Harry was ready in a way that made clear he was not going to ask when that would be. Harry had said he understood. He had not contacted the Ministry. He had not opened the letters. He had not gone to Diagon Alley for the family errand Molly had organized the previous week, sending Ginny and Arthur instead on grounds of a headache that had been, strictly speaking, real enough to mention, but not substantial enough to justify anything. He was aware of the shape this was making. He was aware that Ginny was aware of it too. They hadn't spoken about it directly. They moved around it the way you move around furniture in a room you know well enough to navigate in the dark. It was there. They both knew it was there. What he hadn't expected, somehow, was for the thing to come into focus quite so quickly, quite so simply, in the shape of a January term, and NEWTs in June, and anything I wanted to do afterward. Dinner that night was a lamb stew, thick and good, the kind Molly made when the weather turned, properly cold. Arthur came home at 6:30 with mud on his shoes and the slightly unfocused expression of someone who had been in back-to-back meetings since before 8 in the morning. He sat down, ate without much comment, and was asleep in his chair by 9:15. Ginny helped Molly clear the table. Harry dried the dishes, which was the role he had quietly assumed sometime in the second week, without anyone assigning it to him. "I'm going to write back to McGonagall tonight," Ginny said, handing him a bowl without looking up from the sink. "Tell her yes." "Okay," he said. She handed him another bowl. "You should open your letter," she said, still not looking at him. Her voice was even, unhurried, the same tone she used for the most ordinary observations. He dried the bowl carefully, running the cloth around the inside edge. "I know. You don't have to go back," she said. "That's not what I'm saying." "I know," he said again. She handed him the last bowl and turned off the tap. She dried her hands on the kitchen cloth and looked at him then, directly, for a moment. "I'm going," she said. Quiet, clear, not unkind. He nodded. She folded the kitchen cloth over the handle of the oven door with a tidiness that was entirely her mother's and went upstairs. He stood in the kitchen with the last bowl in his hands and the wireless murmuring its evening program, and Arthur asleep in the next room, and Molly's footsteps somewhere above, and the quiet, specific weight of everything that had not yet been said settling into the room like the cold coming in under the door. He put the bowl away. He did not go upstairs and open the letter on Ron's desk. Outside, through the kitchen window, the garden was dark. The crack in the wall was invisible at this hour, swallowed by the general darkness, indistinguishable from the whole. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. It snowed on Sunday. Not the dramatic kind. No sudden accumulation. No transformation. Overnight. It began sometime before dawn as a fine, directionless drift, the flakes small and purposeful, and by the time Harry came downstairs at 7:30, the garden was covered in a thin, even layer that muffled the usual sounds. The gnome holes were smoothed over. The crack in the wall was still visible, a dark diagonal line against the white, as if it had no intention of being obscured by anything as temporary as weather. He stood at the kitchen window with his tea and looked at it for a while. Molly was not yet down. Arthur had left early, a Sunday meeting, apparently, which had become a regular occurrence as the ministry's reorganization accelerated toward the new year. The house was quiet in the specific way it was quiet when it was only the two of them, a quality of stillness that was different from any other kind that Harry had become familiar with over the weeks and had not yet decided how he felt about. He heard Ginny's footsteps on the stairs, her particular rhythm, unhurried, the third step from the bottom with its familiar creak, and turned back to the kettle. She came in already dressed, in a dark green jumper and jeans, her hair loose. She looked, as she generally did in the mornings, as though she had been awake for some time and had simply been waiting for a reasonable hour to come downstairs. She went directly to the kettle. "Snow," she said. "Since before I woke up," he said. She made her tea and came to stand beside him at the window. They looked at the garden together for a moment in the way that people look at weather, not really seeing it so much as acknowledging it as a shared fact. "I found a garden gnome frozen to the top of the wall last year," she said, "just sitting there, completely solid. Mum vanished him before Dad could study it. That's unfortunate. For the gnome, mainly." He almost smiled. She moved away toward the table, and the moment passed into the general quiet. Molly came down at 8. Her arrival transformed the kitchen with the brisk efficiency it always did. The cooker lit, the bread out, the pan on the heat. She noted the snow with a brief glance out the window, said it was good for the garden actually if it didn't freeze too hard, and began making breakfast with the focused industry of someone who had given the weather its due attention and moved on. The three of them ate together in the kitchen, the wireless on its usual low murmur. The morning news covered a vote in the Wizengamot regarding the interim appointments. Molly commented that it was about time. Harry ate his toast and said nothing. Ginny poured herself a second cup of tea and reached for the marmalade. After a while, Molly said she was going to write to Bill and would Harry mind? And then stopped herself mid-sentence in a way that was almost imperceptible and said she'd also make a shopping list if he wanted company at some point, without finishing whatever she'd been about to ask. Harry said that sounded fine. Ginny looked briefly at the window. The snow continued its quiet accumulation, indifferent to all of it. Molly spent the middle portion of the morning in the sitting room with her writing things, letters spread around her in the organized pattern she worked in, the scratch of her quill audible in the hall. Harry fixed the hinge on the back door, which had been catching for 2 weeks on a slight warp in the wood. It didn't require a spell, just patience and the right tool from Arthur's shed, a small hand plane, which he used carefully along the edge until the door swung clean. He stood back and opened and closed it several times. The snow came in briefly each time, cold against his face. He put the tools away and came back inside. By early afternoon, the house had settled into a Sunday rhythm. Molly finished her letters and took them to the end of the lane for the post owl, returning with the particular briskness of someone who has been cold for a necessary 2 minutes and is now content to be warm for the remainder of the day. She settled in the armchair nearest the fire with her mending, which was a pile that seemed to regenerate regardless of how much she addressed it. Ginny was on the sofa with a book, something with a plain cover, no title visible from where Harry sat. She had her feet tucked underneath her, her tea on the side table, her whole attention apparently given over to the page. Harry was ostensibly reading as well. He had been on the same page for approximately 20 minutes. The fire settled. Molly's needle moved with a quiet, regular sound. Outside the window, the snow was still coming down, slower now, more considered. "The hinge is fixed," Harry said, not particularly to anyone. "I noticed," Molly said, without looking up from her mending. "Thank you, dear." Ginny turned a page. It was the specific kind of afternoon that seemed to exist outside of time. Not unpleasant, not difficult, simply suspended. The burrow had this quality sometimes, Harry had noticed, in the weeks he'd been here. It existed in its own rhythm, slightly apart from the world outside it. The snow helped. The fire helped. The smell of whatever Molly had put in the slow cooker for dinner, already faintly present in the warm air, helped. He looked at his book. He read 3 sentences. He turned the page without absorbing any of it. Ginny looked up from her own book briefly, apparently to check the time on the clock above the mantel. The Weasley family clock, with its 9 hands, most of them now returned to home or mortal peril behind them, all settled now on their ordinary daily notations. She found the time, nodded slightly as if confirming something, and returned to her page. Harry watched the fire for a while. "McGonagall wrote back this morning," Ginny said, without particular emphasis. She was still looking at her book. Molly's needle paused for precisely 1 stitch and resumed. "Already," Harry said. "She's efficient." A brief pause. She confirmed the January start, 2nd week, same as the original term calendar. She turned another page. "She's arranging for the Hogsmeade carriages to run from the station an extra day to accommodate late arrivals. That's..." He searched for something to say about this. "Good planning. She's also reinstating the full Quidditch calendar," Ginny said, "starting in February." A pause that was fractionally longer than the others. "Gryffindor's shorter seeker." He said nothing. Obviously, she added, in a tone that made clear she wasn't pressing. She was simply noting a fact in the way that she noted facts, and what he did with it was entirely his business. Molly said she thought there was more tea if anyone wanted it, and stood to go to the kitchen. The room was quieter without her in it, not uncomfortably so. It was the same room, the same fire, the same snow at the window, but the slight pressure of her presence, her careful, loving, industrious, not listening, lifted, and what remained was the ordinary quiet of two people sitting in a room together. Harry set his unread book down. Ginny continued reading. He looked at the fire. He thought, without wanting to particularly, about what she had said. The January term, the Hogsmeade carriages, the Quidditch calendar. He thought about the matter-of-fact way she'd delivered it, as though it were a weather report. He thought about McGonagall writing back the same morning, the efficiency of it, the world outside moving at its own pace regardless of whether he was keeping up. He thought about the stack of letters on Ron's desk. "You've been making plans," he said. It came out slightly differently than he'd intended. Not an accusation, but not quite neutral either. Somewhere between an observation and a question. Ginny looked up from her book. She looked at him with that same quality of attention she sometimes turned on him. Not sharp, not challenging, simply direct. "Yes," she said. "For a while." "For a few weeks," she said. Yes, for a while." He nodded, as though this answered something. He wasn't sure it did. He looked back at the fire, and then, because the thing was sitting in the room now and being looked at by both of them, whether either of them named it or not, he said it. "Are you going to ask me to come back too?" A pause. "No," Ginny said. He looked at her. "I'm not going to ask you anything," she said. Her voice was even. "You're going to do what you're going to do. That's—" She stopped, considered. "That's yours to sort out." "Right," he said. "But—" She stopped again, and this time the pause was longer, the kind of pause that contained something being chosen carefully. She looked at him with the same directness as before, and when she spoke again, her voice was the same measured tone, but there was something underneath it now, a kind of contained precision. "I'm going. That part isn't changing." The fire settled with a small sound. Harry said, "I know." "Do you?" she said, not unkindly, simply asking. He looked at her. "Because it would be easier," she said, carefully, "if you said whatever you were actually thinking, instead of—" a slight gesture, brief and articulate, "instead of this." The kitchen sounds resumed from the next room. Molly and the kettle, comfortable and deliberate. He opened his mouth. He found that what was there wasn't the easy thing, or the vague thing, or the thing he'd been storing carefully behind, okay? And I know for the past 2 days. There was the actual thing. The thing that had been sitting in his chest since the letter arrived and the frost lay on the garden, and Ginny had folded the page along its original creases and said post as though she were announcing mild weather. He said, "Are you going to ask me whether I want you to go?" She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "I'm not going to ask you that either." He nodded slowly. "But I think—" She paused and set her book down now properly on the side table beside her cooling tea. She looked at him directly. "I think you might want to think carefully about what you'd say if I did." Molly came back in with the tea tray. setting it on the low table in front of the fire with the care of someone bringing something that is needed, and asked brightly whether either of them wanted a biscuit, and the moment folded itself away into the ordinary afternoon. The fire, the snow at the window, the slow, quiet accumulation of everything still unsaid. Harry took a cup. Ginny took a cup. Outside, the snow settled evenly over the garden. The crack in the wall held its line, dark against the white, patient as it had always been. Neither of them spoke again until dinner. Molly went to bed at 9:30. She announced it the way she announced most things, practically without fuss, saying she had letters to finish in the morning and the slow cooker needed setting for tomorrow, and she would see them both at breakfast. She paused at the doorway long enough to ask whether Harry needed anything, in the tone she used that meant the question covered considerably more than its surface. And when he said no, "Thank you," she nodded once and went upstairs. Her footsteps crossed the ceiling. The bedroom door closed. The sitting room was quiet. The fire had burned down to a steady, low heat. Not the bright fire of early evening, but the settled version, orange and reliable, requiring no attention. The snow had stopped sometime around 8. Through the window, the garden was dark, the white ground faintly luminous under a clouded sky. The wireless had been turned off after dinner. The only sounds were the fire and, distantly, the house making its ordinary nighttime adjustments. Ginny hadn't moved to go up yet. She was on the sofa with her feet tucked underneath her, her book closed on the cushion beside her, her tea finished. She was looking at the fire. Harry was in the armchair adjacent. He had been looking at the fire as well. The afternoon's unfinished conversation had been present at dinner, politely quiet, taking up its space, not requiring acknowledgement. Molly had talked about Bill's last letter. Arthur had called from the ministry to say he'd be late and had ended up not coming home at all. The slow cooker had been very good. Now it was just the two of them, and the fire and the particular quality of an evening that had not yet resolved itself. Harry spoke first. "You said I should think about what I'd say," he said, "if you asked." Ginny looked at him. She had the stillness she always had, and she was paying full attention, not tense, simply focused. "I did," she said. "I've been thinking about it." "I know," she said. "You've had the look." He almost asked what look. He decided against it. "I don't want you not to go," he said, carefully. "That's not—" He stopped, started again. "I don't think you shouldn't go." She waited. "I'm worried," he said. It was the truest thing he'd managed to say out loud in several weeks. He felt the plainness of it, the exposure of it, sitting in the air between them. Ginny was quiet for a moment. "About what, specifically?" she said. He looked at the fire. "About you being—" He found the sentence difficult to finish. Not because he didn't know what he meant, but because what he meant sounded, when he tried to put it into words, like something he knew she would push back on. And he wasn't wrong about that. And the anticipation of it was already sitting in his chest. "You'd be visible," he said. "Going back, you'd be associated with everything." "I'm already associated with everything," Ginny said. Her voice was even. "That happened 2 years ago. It happened before you and I were even. It happened when I was 11, Harry. I don't get to be not associated with it." "I know," he said. "I know that. I mean going forward, publicly. Going back to school is publicly visible to you. The Prophet runs a piece Every time someone mentions my name, he said, you know what they're like. You'd be in it. Every story, I've been in their stories, she said. I survived that. He stopped. She was looking at him with the same directness as before, not angry, not yet, but attentive in a way that had sharpened slightly, the way attention sharpens when it identifies something worth examining. That's not what this is about, she said. He said nothing. Is it? She said. The fire settled with a low sound. A log shifted, sending a brief rise of sparks upward and gone. He had known somewhere under all of it that she would get there. Ginny had always had this quality, a directness of perception that cut through whatever was placed in front of it. Not aggressively, but simply because she wasn't interested in the version of things that required additional maintenance. She wanted the actual thing. She had always wanted the actual thing. He said, I don't want to drag you back into it. Into what? Into whatever comes next. He stopped. There'll be trials, ministry hearings. They want statements. And the press won't stop. And people are going to be. There are still people out there who. He stopped again. He was aware of how it sounded. He was aware that it sounded like something he hadn't said clearly enough to be argued with. I don't know what the next few years look like, he said. I don't know what I look like in them. I don't know what comes out of all of this, and I don't. He looked at the fire. I don't want you in the middle of it. The room was quiet. You don't want me in the middle of it, Ginny said. No, of your life. He looked at her. That's not what I said. It's close to what you said. It's not the same thing. You're describing your life, Harry. Her voice was still even, still controlled, but there was something under it now, a tightness, a precision. The trials and the ministry and the press and whatever comes next, that's your life. And you're saying, you don't want me in it. I'm saying, I don't want to pull you into something that. You're not pulling me anywhere, she said. I'm here. I'm already here. I've been making my own decisions about where I am for quite some time, and none of them involved you pulling me. He said, Ginny, you're talking about me like I'm something that happens to you, she said, like being near you is a thing that occurs to people whether they want it to or not, and they just have to survive it. She paused. Is that what you think? He didn't answer. Because that's what it sounds like, she said. It sounds like you've decided that whatever darkness follows you around is something I can't be trusted near. And you've made that decision on my behalf without asking me, and you're dressing it up as concern. It is concern, he said, and he heard his own voice come out more sharply than he'd intended. It's genuine. I'm sure it is, she said. That's not what I'm questioning. He stood up, not in anger exactly, more in the way that a body moves when sitting still has become insufficient. He went to the window and stood with his arms crossed, looking out at the dark garden. The snow on the ground reflected what little light there was, pale and flat. Behind him, Ginny had not moved from the sofa. He could feel her attention at his back. I watched people die, he said. Because of me. Because of what I was involved in. Because of what I am. Because of. He stopped. His voice had lost some of its shape. He steadied it. Fred, Lupin, Tonks, Sirius, Dumbledore. He stopped again. Every one of them was near me, or near what I was near. And every one of them, He heard the silence from behind him change quality. "I know," Ginny said. Her voice was quieter now, still controlled, but quieter. "I know who died. Then you understand." "Fred was my brother," she said. "Not a casualty of your proximity. My brother, who made his own choices, same as all of them. Same as Lupin and Tonks and Sirius and—" She stopped. When she continued, her voice was very steady. "They didn't die because they were near you. They died because there was a war, and they chose to fight in it. All of them. You didn't conscript them." "I know that," he said. "Do you?" He turned around. She was looking at him from the sofa, her hands in her lap, the firelight making the angles of her face precise and clear. She looked, he thought, very much like herself. Not frightened, not wavering, completely and entirely present in the way she always was. It was one of the things about her that had always undone him slightly, that quality of absolute presence. "Because what you're describing," she said, "is a version of events where your proximity is the significant variable, where being near Harry Potter is the dangerous condition. And if that's what you believe, genuinely, if you think the answer is to keep everyone you care about at arm's length, then I think you need to say that plainly, so I know what we're actually talking about." He said nothing. "Say it plainly," she said. Again, quiet. Again, not unkind. He looked at her. He thought about the letters on the desk. He thought about the ministry owls. He thought about the crack in the wall, waiting patient and untended. He thought about the way she'd folded the Hogwarts letter back along its original creases and put it in her pocket and said post as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "I'm afraid," he said, "that I'll drag you back into something dark and you'll lose things because of it. And I won't be able to stop it happening. And I'll have to watch it, and I can't—" He stopped. "I don't know if I can watch that. I don't know if I have anything left to watch something like that with." The fire made its small sounds. Ginny looked at him for a moment. "Okay," she said. "That's the real thing. Yes, that's different from what you were saying before. I know. That's not about me," she said. "That's about you, what you can carry." He nodded once. She was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of having nothing to say, but the silence of someone deciding exactly what to say and how to say it with care. "I hear that," she said. "I do, and I'm not dismissing it." A pause. "But Harry, you don't get to make that choice for me. Whatever you can or can't carry, that's yours to work out. What I can survive, what I'm willing to walk into, what I choose to be near, that's mine." He looked at her. "You don't get to decide what I can survive," she said. The sentence was quiet. It was not raised. It landed the way true things land, without drama, without decoration, with the full weight of something that had been carefully and accurately aimed. He stood by the window in the dark garden's reflected light and did not speak, and felt the sentence settle into him the way cold air settles into a room, gradually, thoroughly, finding every corner. The fire burned low and steady. Outside, the snow lay even and still over the garden, and the crack in the wall ran its patient line from the third stone to the seventh, and the house held its quiet around them both. The sentence stayed in the room. Harry didn't move from the window. Ginny didn't move from the sofa. The fire had settled into its lowest register now, barely requiring attention, just present. a dull orange permanence at the edge of everything. The clock on the mantel marked the half hour with a single soft sound. 10:30. Upstairs. Nothing. Molly's room was quiet. The house was quiet. Outside, the snow lay unchanged over the garden, pale and flat under the clouded sky. The crack in the wall a dark mark against all that white stillness. Harry looked at it. You don't get to decide what I can survive. He turned the sentence over in his mind, the way you turn something solid and unfamiliar in your hands, trying to understand its weight and edges. It wasn't an attack. He understood that clearly, standing here with the window cold against his shoulder. It wasn't even an argument, not quite. It was something more like a correction, a careful, deliberate redrawing of a line he had moved without asking permission. He had moved it because he thought he was protecting her. He understood now that she was telling him those two things were not the same. He came back to the armchair, not with anything to say. He didn't have anything to say yet, nothing that felt equal to what she'd said or adequate to the space that had opened up in the room. But standing at the window felt like a kind of retreat, and retreating seemed wrong. He sat down. He looked at the fire. Ginny was still on the sofa. She had not, as far as he could tell, moved at all while he'd been at the window. She sat with her hands in her lap and her feet tucked underneath her book still closed on the cushion beside her, and she was looking at the fire too. Not pointedly, simply waiting. He had noticed this about her over the weeks, the particular quality of her patience. It was not passive. It was not the patience of someone who had nothing else to be doing. It was the patience of someone who had decided that a thing was worth waiting for and was prepared to wait for it properly without filling the time with noise. He had been the beneficiary of it for 6 weeks and had not until now fully understood what it cost. "Tell me," he said. She looked at him. "You said you kept fighting while I was gone." He looked at her. "Tell me what that was." She was quiet for a moment. He watched her consider it, not whether to tell him, he thought, but how. How much? In what order? "The Carrows came in September," she said finally. Her voice was even, matter-of-fact, the tone she used for things she'd already put into order in her own mind. Brother and sister, amicus and electo, they were given defense against the dark arts and muggle studies. What they taught wasn't a pause. It wasn't those subjects. Not really. He said nothing. He listened. Amicus used the Cruciatus curse on students, she said, as punishment, and he required other students to practice it on classmates who'd broken rules. She said this the way she said most things, plainly, without color. He called it practical application. The fire made a small sound. Snape was headmaster, she said. The teachers who remained were constrained. They couldn't openly resist without losing their positions, and if they lost their positions, someone worse would replace them. So most of them stayed and did what they could from the inside, which wasn't always much. She paused. Professor McGonagall stayed. That mattered. "What did you do?" Harry said. "We reformed the DA." She said it simply, as a fact. Neville mostly at first. And Luna. And me. We started meeting in the room of requirement again, same as before. Teaching defensive magic, keeping the practice going. A brief pause. We couldn't stop what was happening. We couldn't take the Carrows on directly without. There would have been consequences, serious ones, for students who had no part in it. So we worked around them. We disrupted where we could, protected where we could. We managed the damage. She said, manage the damage, the way you'd say fixed the hinge on the back door, functionally, without drama. How long? Harry said. The whole year. She looked at the fire. September through May. He thought about that. 9 months. September through May in a school run by people who used torture as a teaching method, in a world where Voldemort was openly in power and the Ministry was hunting his friends and everyone who had ever helped him. 9 months of that, quietly, without anyone knowing, without him knowing. You didn't tell me, he said. Then immediately, I know you couldn't have. I'm not saying that as a criticism. I know, she said. He stopped. I didn't know. I was gone and I didn't know what was happening here He stopped again. He found, unexpectedly, that the sentence was harder to finish than he'd anticipated, because what was at the end of it was something he hadn't looked at directly before. I thought about you being safe, he said. The whole time. I needed you to be safe. It was one of the things I held on to, that you were here, and it was difficult, but you were safe, and eventually He stopped. Ginny was looking at him. Eventually I'd come back, he said, and you'd be here. I was here, she said, quiet. I know. He looked at the fire. I understand now that safe and here were not the same thing. She said nothing. She let that sit. Were you afraid? He said. A pause. Yes, she said. Not reluctantly, simply accurately. Not the whole time. You get accustomed to a level of fear, and it becomes the background rather than the foreground. But yes, there were things that were frightening. What things? She considered. When Neville was taken, for questioning, he came back. He was all right, eventually. But there was a period where we didn't know what was happening, and the not knowing was... She paused. That was the worst kind of afraid, the kind where you don't have anything to act on. Harry said, I know that kind. I know you do, she said. He leaned forward in the armchair, elbows on his knees, looking at the low fire. He was thinking about the version of the year he had carried with him, the version in which he was here, difficult but manageable. The burrow, a fixed point. He had needed that version. He understood that now. He had needed somewhere in his mind that wasn't the tent, the cold, the weight of the locket, the dwindling plan. He had needed her to be the fixed point. She had been, in fact, the opposite of a fixed point. She had been in motion the entire time, fighting her own version of the same war, managing her own version of the same impossible weight, without the option of leaving. He had not known this. He had not asked. I'm sorry, he said. She looked at him. For what? For not... He stopped. For the version of you I was carrying around in my head. The safe, still version. I don't think I was carrying the real one. She was quiet for a moment. You were doing what you could with what you had, she said. Same as everyone. That's very generous. It's accurate, she said. I'm not interested in generous. I'm interested in accurate. He almost smiled. She saw it, and something in her expression relaxed fractionally, not into warmth exactly, but into something adjacent to it. The slight loosening of sustained attention. That's what I mean, she said after a moment. When I say you don't get to decide what I can survive. She looked at him directly. You've been making a calculation about me, about what I can handle, what I can be near, what I'm equipped for, and you've been making it without knowing what I already survived. A pause. You've been protecting a version of me that doesn't exist. He looked at her. The real version, she said, is someone who ran a resistance operation at 16 in a school under occupation and came out the other side of it. That's who you're worried about being able to handle the prophet and ministry hearings. A beat. It's a bit of a mismatch, he said, when you put it that way. That's the only way it is, she said. Not unkindly, factually. He looked at the fire. He sat with it. The mismatch, the gap between the version he'd been protecting and the person sitting 3 feet away from him on the sofa. The gap was significant. It was the gap between who he'd needed her to be and who she actually was. And the troubling thing was that he understood with a clarity that was somewhat uncomfortable that she was better, that the actual version was more capable, more formed, more certain of herself than the still, safe version he'd been carrying, which made his project of protecting her somewhat absurd. He said, I think I've been treating loving you like it was the same thing as keeping you safe. She was quiet. And I think that's wrong, he said. I think those are different things, and I've been conflating them. He paused. I don't think I knew they were different until just now. The clock on the mantel marked the hour. 11. From the kitchen came a faint sound, the house settling, or perhaps the slow cooker Molly had set before bed, going about its quiet work. They are different, Ginny said. Her voice had changed slightly, still even, still controlled, but something underneath it had eased, not softened, eased, like a tension released rather than dissolved. Keeping someone safe is about what they can't handle. Loving someone is about trusting what they can. He looked at her. She looked back. You've been doing the first one, she said, without much of the second. He nodded. He thought about that. He thought about the 6 weeks at the burrow, the careful movement around each other, the fondness and the distance, the things he'd been not saying because he thought not saying them was a form of consideration. He thought about Ginny not pushing, not asking, waiting with her particular quality of patience, not because she had nothing to say, but because she had decided he needed to arrive somewhere on his own. She had been trusting him to get there. He had been simultaneously not trusting her to handle anything at all. I'm going to open the letters, he said. She didn't say anything. Not tonight, but soon. The ministry ones especially. He paused. I've been avoiding them because answering them means deciding something, and I haven't felt ready to decide anything, and I think I've been using that as... He stopped. I've been hiding. I think that's what I've been doing. I know, she said. Was it obvious? To me, yes, she said. To Mum, yes. To anyone paying attention. Right. Dad's been very carefully not mentioning it, she said. Which is his version of flagging it. He said, I'll talk to him. She nodded. He'd like that. The fire had burned down further. The room was dim and warm, the snow outside unchanged. The house around them settled fully into its nighttime quiet. He was aware of having been in this room for several hours and of it feeling like both a very long time and not long enough. He looked at her. She was looking at the fire. Her profile in the low light was clear and still. She looked, he thought, like someone who had said what she needed to say and was now simply present, neither pushing forward nor retreating, occupying her own space in the room with the same completeness she occupied everything. "I don't know how to do this properly," he said. "Whatever this is, I don't have a good model for it. How to be with someone without the thing I've been doing. The protection that isn't actually about the other person," she said. "Yes, I know," she said. "I know you don't." She looked at him. "But you just said the real thing for the first time tonight. So that's not nothing," he said. "It took about 3 hours. It took 6 weeks," she said. "Tonight was just the last bit." He was quiet then. "Is that—" He stopped. "Are you—" "I'm here," she said. Simply. "I'm still here. If I wasn't going to be, I'd have said so." He looked at her for a moment, and she looked back, and it was not a resolution exactly. There was no neat closing of a gap, no single moment of repair. What it was something smaller and more durable than that. It was the acknowledgement of a true thing, shared between two people who had now, for the first time, both said what they actually meant. It was, perhaps, a beginning. He didn't leave. She didn't leave. They sat in the sitting room by the dying fire, not saying much, until past midnight. The snow outside stayed where it was. The house stayed quiet around them. Upstairs, nothing moved. Eventually, Molly came downstairs for a glass of water, as she sometimes did. She came into the sitting room in her dressing gown, saw them both on their respective pieces of furniture, and said, in the tone of someone who had noticed quite a lot and intended to remark on none of it, that she hoped they weren't planning to stay up all night, and that there was pumpkin juice in the cold cupboard if anyone wanted it. Neither of them answered. She went back upstairs. Ginny looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ginny. "Pumpkin juice," he said. "She means well," Ginny said. "She always means well." A brief pause. Then quietly, Ginny smiled. Not the careful smile of the past weeks, not the managed one, but an actual smile, brief and real and entirely her own. Harry felt something shift in his chest, quiet as a fire settling, quiet as snow. Outside the window, the garden lay patient and white, and the crack in the wall ran its faithful line from the third stone to the seventh, unchanged and unchanging. The fire needed tending. Harry noticed it the way you notice things when you have been sitting still for a long time. Gradually, at the edge of attention, a shift in the quality of the room. The orange had gone to deep red, the logs reduced to their final stage, heat still present, but barely. He got up without saying anything, found the small iron poker on its hook beside the hearth, and added the last 2 logs from the basket. The fire took them slowly, considering, and then caught and brightened, and the room came back. He returned to the armchair. Ginny said, "Thank you," he said. "There's enough for another hour, maybe." "That's enough," she said. They had arrived somewhere different in the course of the evening. He was aware of it without being able to name it precisely. Not resolution, not the closing of something, but a different quality of air between them. Less pressure. The sentence she had said was still present, but it had stopped being a wound and become something more like a compass bearing. "You don't get to decide what I can survive." He had the feeling he would be returning to it for some time. He looked at the fire. She looked at the fire. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "The DA," he said. "That year. What did it feel like to keep it going? When you didn't know, when none of us knew how it was going to end?" She was quiet for a moment. The fire had found its rhythm with the new logs and was burning cleanly now. Like maintenance, she said. He looked at her. Maintenance. You keep doing the thing because the thing needs doing, she said. Not because you can see the end of it. You don't think about the end of it, actually, because the end of it is too large and too uncertain, and thinking about it consumes energy you need for the immediate problem. She paused. So you break it down. What do we need today? Who needs to know this spell? Who is frightened and needs steadying? What can we do right now? She looked at the fire. You get very focused on right now. He understood this completely. He had lived a version of it himself for the better part of a year. The tent, the Horcruxes, the immediate problem, right now. Did it help? He said. Breaking it down. Yes, she said. And sometimes no. Sometimes the immediate problem is bad enough that breaking it down just means looking at a smaller version of something terrible. A pause. The night Neville was taken was like that. There was no breaking it down. There was just sitting with it. Who did you sit with it with? He said. She looked at him. Luna, mostly. And Neville's gran. We sent an owl, and she wrote back, and the letter was... She stopped briefly. It was a good letter. It helped. Luna, he said. He thought about Luna, who had been taken in January, who had been at Malfoy Manor, who had been through her own impossible year. Was she all right? After. Luna is, Ginny considered. Luna processes things differently. She doesn't carry things the way other people do. I don't know if that's easier or harder. It's just different. She paused. She was glad to be home. She helped her father rebuild the Quibbler. After, I think she was all right. As much as anyone. As much as anyone, he said. Yes. He sat with that for a moment. As much as anyone, which was not entirely, which was not without cost, which was the most accurate thing to say about most of the people he knew. As much as anyone covered a great deal of ground. Can I ask you something? Ginny said. Yes. The locket, she said. Ron told me a bit about what it was like to wear it. A pause. What it did. Harry looked at the fire. He had not talked about this with anyone, not in any real sense. There had been brief factual accounts in the hours after, the battle in the early days at the Burrow, reconstructions of events for people who needed to understand the sequence. But the texture of it, what it had actually been like from the inside, he had kept in a corner of himself that he hadn't opened. He thought about whether to open it now. He found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he wanted to. It found things, he said. The locket. Whatever you were most afraid of, whatever you were most uncertain about, it located it and it amplified it. It made it feel true. He paused. For me, it was the fear that I was going to fail, that I'd gotten everyone killed already, and I was going to get everyone else killed, and there was nothing underneath that except more failure, and eventually, he stopped. It felt very certain. When you were wearing it, the bad version of everything felt like the real version. She was listening without moving. Ron had it worse than me, he said. I think because what it found in Ron was more complicated, older, things he'd been carrying since he was very young. He paused. He destroyed it. He was the one who destroyed it in the end. I don't think I could have. Why not? Because by that point, I half believed it, he said. The things it was saying. I could feel the logic of them. Ginny was quiet for a moment. What made you stop believing it? He thought about this. Hermione, he said. Mostly. He paused. She was very steady. When the locket wasn't on her, she was very steady. She kept doing the next thing. She kept treating me like I was still the person I was supposed to be, even when I wasn't behaving like it. He paused. It's difficult to disbelieve your own worst version of yourself when you're alone with it. It's somewhat easier when someone else is stubbornly refusing to see you that way. Ginny said nothing for a moment. Then, "That's what I've been trying to do," she said, quietly. "Here, these weeks." He looked at her. "Not pushing," she said. "Not asking too much too soon. Just being here and treating you like the person I know you are while you worked out the rest." A small pause. I wasn't sure it was working. He looked at the fire. He thought about the 6 weeks, the meals and the tea and the hinge on the door and the letters on the desk and the careful, patient, undemanding presence of her. "It was working," he said. She nodded once, a small, precise movement. "I should have said that sooner," he said. "You said it now," she said. The new logs had fully caught. The room was warmer, brighter than it had been. The clock on the mantel marked the quarter hour, 11:30. "Tell me about Fred," Harry said. He said it quietly and without preparation. The name had been in the room all evening, in the background of everything. One of the names he'd listed at the window, one of the weights he'd been trying to articulate. He had not said it directly until now. Ginny was still for a moment. "You don't have to," he said immediately. "No," she said. "I'll tell you." She shifted slightly on the sofa, resettling her feet. She looked at the fire. Fred was exactly what you knew him to be. I don't think he was different at home than he was at school. He didn't have a private version. He was just Fred all the time. A pause. Which made him very easy to be around and also sometimes very much too much. Harry said nothing. He listened. "He drove Mum absolutely mad," Ginny said. "She would lose her temper with him, and he would find the exact right thing to say to make her laugh. She'd be furious and laughing at the same time, and she hated that, and he knew she hated it, and he loved it." She paused. "George has a different version of that. George is funnier in a quieter way. Fred was the one who made it loud." "He was kind," Harry said. "I don't think that's always obvious from the outside because of the rest of it. But he was." "He was," Ginny said. "He was very kind. He looked after George, and he looked after Ron more than Ron knows. And She stopped briefly. "He was kind to me when I was small, treated me like a person before some of the others got around to it." Harry nodded. "I was angry for a long time," Ginny said. Her voice remained even, but it was the careful evenness of something held steady deliberately. "Not at anyone in particular, just angry, at the shape of it, at the waste of it." She paused. "There's no version of the war in which Fred needed to die. It doesn't resolve anything. It doesn't balance any ledger. It's just a thing that happened, and now there's a shape in the world where he was, and now isn't." Harry said, "I know you know," she said. I'm not telling you because I expect you to fix it. I'm telling you because you asked." "I know," he said again. "I'm glad you're telling me." She looked at the fire. "George is the hard one," she said. "Not because he's less capable. He's more capable than most people realize. But Fred was..." She paused. "Some people come in pairs, and those two really were a pair in the true sense of it." George is going to be all right. I know he is. But the shape of being all right is going to be different from what we expected, and I don't think he knows yet what it looks like." "No," Harry said. "I don't think he does either." "He'll find it," Ginny said. "He'll build something. He's already building something, even in the mess of it." A pause. "That's what he does. He builds things." They sat with this for a while. The fire made its small, quiet sounds. The house was still above them. "Can I tell you something?" Harry said. "Yes." "The night it ended," he said. In the hours after." He looked at the fire. "I slept for about 12 hours in Gryffindor Tower. And when I woke up, I didn't know for a few seconds that it was over. I woke up and I felt the same as I'd felt for a year. The weight of it, the dread. And then I remembered, and—" He stopped. "And I didn't know what to feel. I didn't know what the feeling was supposed to be." "Relief," she said. "I thought that's what it would be," he said. "But it wasn't that exactly. It was more like—" He paused. "Like putting down something very heavy and finding that your body doesn't know how to stand without it." She nodded. "I know that," she said. "I felt that in the first few weeks. The absence of the weight is its own strange thing to carry." "Yes," he said. "Exactly that." "It gets easier," she said. "The body learns. You find a different way to stand." "Are you there?" he said. "Have you found it?" She considered this genuinely, not quickly. "Mostly," she said. "There are still days when I reach for the weight and find it gone and the absence feels wrong. But mostly, yes." A pause. "Going back to school will help. Having the structure back, the routine of it." He nodded. I think I understand that now. Why you want to go." "Do you?" she said. Quiet, not testing, simply asking. "Yes," he said. "I think you need the structure. And I think you've been—" He paused. "I think being here has been generous of you, and I'm grateful for it. But I think you've been waiting a bit, in between." She was quiet for a moment. "A bit," she said. "Yes." "I'm sorry for that," he said. "Don't apologize for needing the time," she said. "Apologize if you'd wasted it. You haven't." He looked at her. She looked back, and again there was that quality of her attention. Precise, direct, completely present. He had spent 6 weeks being the recipient of that attention from a careful distance. It was different now, at a closer range. It was steadier, less managed. "I'm going to open the letters tomorrow," he said. "Okay," she said. "All of them," he said, "including the Hogwarts one." She said nothing. She waited. "I don't know what I'll decide," he said, "about going back. I genuinely don't know yet. But I'll open it and He paused. "I'll give it a fair consideration, without deciding in advance what the answer is. That's all it needs," she said. "And whatever I decide," he said, "it won't be because I'm trying to keep you at a safe distance." She looked at him for a moment. "No," she said, "it won't." It was not a question, and not quite a statement. It was the particular tone she used when she was confirming something she already knew, acknowledging it aloud as a shared fact rather than a new piece of information. He found it, obscurely, the most reassuring thing anyone had said to him in a long time. Molly came back. Not for water this time. She appeared in the doorway fully, her dressing gown wrapped around her, her hair in its nighttime plaid. She looked at the two of them with an expression that conveyed, with admirable economy, that she had been awake for some time, that she was not going to ask any questions, and that she thought the fire could probably do with one more log. "I set the slow cooker," she said. "There's pumpkin juice, and I made a small plate of biscuits if anyone wants them." She looked at Harry. She looked at Ginny. "I'll leave it on the kitchen table." She went to the kitchen. There were sounds, the familiar, small, organized sounds of Molly managing something. Then she came back through, said good night, without looking at either of them with any particular intensity, and went back upstairs. Her footsteps crossed the ceiling. Her door closed. The house settled around them again. Harry and Ginny looked at the doorway she'd left through. "She knew," Harry said. "Didn't she? That we were?" "Mum always knows," Ginny said. "She's known since approximately the first week." "And she just made biscuits," Ginny said. "Yes." A pause. "That's what she does." Harry looked at the kitchen doorway. He thought about Molly Weasley and her particular brand of love, enormous and practical and expressed almost entirely through the management of food and the strategic deployment of cups of tea. He thought about what it had cost her this year and how she was still here, still making biscuits at midnight for two people sitting by a dying fire. He felt something large and complicated move through him and settle. "I'll get the biscuits," he said. He got up and went to the kitchen. The plate was on the table, a generous one. Shortbread, by the look of them, slightly warm. He brought it back and set it on the low table between the sofa and the armchair. Ginny took one. He took one. The fire was warm. The biscuit was good. The house was quiet around them, patient and familiar and unchanged, and outside the snow lay still over the garden. They sat for another half hour without saying much. It was the easiest silence the evening had produced. The second week of January came in cold and clear. The snow that had settled over Christmas had compacted and thinned in the mild days between. And now, on the morning of Ginny's departure, the garden lay under a hard, bright frost, the kind that made the ground ring underfoot and turned the bare branches of the orchard into precise silver lines against a sky the color of pale slate. No clouds, no wind, just the cold and the light and the particular clarity of a January morning that had decided to be what it was without apology. Harry had been awake since 6. He had not set an alarm. He had simply woken in the way that you wake when something is happening that day, and lain for a while in Ron's bed, looking at the ceiling, listening to the burrow come to life around him. The boiler, the kitchen sounds, Molly downstairs before 7, as she always was, moving through her routines with the efficiency of someone who found order in mornings. He got up, dressed, and went downstairs. Ginny's trunk was in the front hall. It had appeared there the night before, carried down by her alone apparently, because none of them had noticed it happen until Arthur had nearly walked into it, coming in from the garden. It stood by the door with the self-contained purposefulness of a thing that had been placed and was not going to be moved again except in the direction of forward. Her broomstick was propped against the wall beside it, the old school one she'd been using over the weeks, though she had mentioned, in passing, without particular emphasis, that McGonagall had arranged for the school brooms to be serviced over the holidays. Harry looked at the trunk on his way to the kitchen. He made his tea and stood at the window. The frost on the garden was very bright. The crack in the wall was clearly visible from here, the dark diagonal line unchanged. He had fixed the hinge on the back door, and cleaned the gutters on the east side of the house and tightened 2 loose flagstones in the garden path and moved 3 of the winter gnomes from under the kitchen window where they had begun tunneling into the foundation. He had not fixed the crack in the wall. He was not sure why exactly. It had stopped seeming like a thing he was avoiding and become more like a thing he was simply leaving for now, for reasons that felt, if not clear, at least honestly uncertain. He drank his tea. Molly made a full breakfast. This was not unusual. Molly made a full breakfast most mornings, with the conviction of someone who believed strongly in the relationship between a good start and everything that followed. But this morning had an additional intention to it, a care in the preparation that communicated without announcing itself that this meal was significant. The full arrangement, eggs and toast and bacon, and the good marmalade that she only brought out for particular occasions, and mushrooms that she had clearly been planning to save for Sunday. Ginny came down at 7:30 in her school clothes, dark jeans, a jumper in a deep burgundy, her hair up. She sat at the table and accepted the plate Molly put in front of her and said good morning with the same matter-of-fact tone she said most things, and the meal proceeded. Arthur was there. He had arranged his own morning to accommodate it. Harry had heard him in the early hours on the telephone with someone from the ministry, shifting something, and the call had been brief and decisive in the way that Arthur's work conversations always were when he had decided something was non-negotiable. He sat at the head of the table and ate his eggs and told a moderately long story about a Muggle transport mechanism he had encountered in a ministry briefing the previous week, and everyone listened with the appreciation that Arthur's stories deserved, genuine interest, patience with the tangents, amusement in the appropriate places. It was a good breakfast. Harry ate and said the right things at the right times, and was aware, beneath all of it, of the clock moving. The apparition point was at the edge of the garden. The burrow did not have a proper apparition point in the official sense. It was simply the place that everyone used, a patch of ground near the back gate where the garden ended and the lane began, worn slightly smooth from years of use. You could apparate to other locations directly, of course, but the convention in the Weasley household was to use the lane gate as the departure point, and the Hogwarts Express was leaving from King's Cross at 11. Ginny had arranged to apparate to the station directly. Molly had argued briefly for accompanying her, with the contained worry of someone who understood intellectually that her daughter was 17 and entirely capable, but who felt the morning warranted something more than a simple departure. Ginny had, with the precise and affectionate firmness she had always been able to deploy with her mother, declined. She would manage perfectly well. She would write when she arrived. She would be home at Easter. Molly had pressed her lips together and said, of course, and then gone back to clearing the breakfast things with rather more energy than the task strictly required. At 10:10, Ginny came back downstairs from a final check of her room. Arthur was putting on his coat. He had a late morning meeting, but had stayed as long as he could, which was, Harry thought, exactly the right thing. He held Ginny for a long moment, said something quietly into the top of her head that no one else caught, and let her go. Ginny kissed his cheek and said she'd write. Molly was more sustained. She held on for a perceptible amount of time, and then held on for a bit longer, and then stepped back and straightened Ginny's collar, which did not need straightening, and said that she was to eat properly and not spend all her time on the Quidditch pitch when there were NEWTs to consider, and to tell Professor McGonagall that Molly sent her regards. Ginny said she would. Molly went to the kitchen. Arthur picked up his briefcase and went out the front door, pausing on the step to look back once. He caught Harry's eye. He gave him a slight nod, the small, precise, complete nod of a man who had noticed quite a lot and trusted that the rest would manage itself, and walked down the lane toward the apparition spot from the other direction. Then it was just the two of them in the front hall. The trunk had been reduced and was in Ginny's jacket pocket. Her broom was in her hand. She looked ready in the specific way that she looked when she had organized a thing fully and was simply waiting for the moment to execute it. Present, unhurried, complete. Harry said, "I'll walk you to the gate." She said, "All right." They went out through the kitchen, past Molly, who was washing up with considerable focus, and did not turn around, and out through the back door into the cold. The frost crunched underfoot. Their breath made small clouds in the sharp air. The orchard was bare and silver to their left, the lane ahead of them, the sky very pale and very clear. Their footsteps were the loudest thing in the garden. He matched her pace. They walked along the path toward the back gate without speaking. At the gate, she stopped. She turned to look at him. Her face in the winter light was clear and familiar and entirely her own, not guarded, not performing anything, simply present. The same face she'd had at the fire the night they'd finally said the actual things. He had thought about that evening consistently over the past 3 weeks, not with the anxious quality of unresolved things, but with something different, a quality of reference, like consulting a bearing. "I opened the letters," he said. "I know," she said. "You told me." "I'm going to meet with Kingsley next Thursday," he said, "about the aura training. They're starting a new intake in March." She nodded. "And I wrote to McGonagall," he said, "about the 7th year option." She waited. "I told her I didn't think going back to Hogwarts was the right thing for me," he said. "Not this year. I think the aura training is. I think that's the right shape for the next part. But I wanted to tell her properly rather than just not respond." "That was right," she said. She'd have appreciated that. "She wrote back already," he said. "She said she understood completely, and she hoped the training went well, and that Hogwarts would always be there if he changed his mind." A pause. "She referred to me in the third person, in a letter addressed to me." "She does that sometimes," Ginny said. "When she wants to communicate something formally, it means she meant it." He nodded. They stood at the gate. The lane beyond it was empty, the frost on the verge catching the winter light. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said, about the difference between keeping someone safe and trusting their strength." She looked at him. "I'm going to keep working on that," he said, "on the second one." She held his gaze for a moment. The look on her face was not warm exactly, or not only warm. It was the precise, clear look of someone who was hearing what they said and taking it at its value, neither more nor less. "I know you will," she said. He said, "I'll write." "I know you will," she said again, and there was something different in it this time. Not affirmation, but simple fact. The distinction between promising something and knowing it to already be true. She opened the gate. She did not ask him to be careful. He did not tell her the same. She stepped through to the lane and turned once to look back at him, not with ceremony, not with the weight of a farewell, simply a last look, natural as breathing. Then she turned and walked the 4 or 5 steps to the apparition point, and he watched her become very still for one moment in the way that people do just before disapparating, and then she was gone. A small sharp sound, cold air rushing in to fill the space. The lane was empty. He stood at the gate for a while. The cold was steady and clean. The orchard stood in its winter clarity beside him, every branch exact and still. Somewhere in the garden behind him, a gnome grumbled under the frost. He was aware of the gate in his hand, the cold iron of it, solid and familiar. He was aware of the burrow behind him, its sounds and its warmth and its reliable particular smell of wood smoke, and something Molly was already starting for dinner. He was aware of himself standing here without the weight, not without weight entirely. He understood by now that the weight didn't simply leave. It became manageable. It became a different shape. You found a way to stand with it that didn't require you to hold still. He closed the gate. He turned back toward the house. The frost crunched under his boots, steady and even. The pale sky held its clarity above the burrow's mismatched roofline. The smoke from the kitchen chimney rose in a straight, clean line. He passed the crack in the wall. He stopped. He looked at it for a moment. The dark diagonal line from the 3rd stone to the 7th, patient as it had always been. He took his wand from his jacket. He thought about it. He put his wand away. He kept walking. The crack could wait. It had waited this long. There would be time, and the right tools, and a morning when fixing, it was simply the next sensible thing to do. Not a symbol, not a statement, just a wall that needed mending when he was ready to mend it. He went inside. Molly was at the stove and did not turn around, but she said that the tea was fresh and that there were biscuits left from last night if he wanted them, and that she thought it might be cold enough for snow again by afternoon. Harry poured himself a cup. He sat at the kitchen table. He thought about March and the Aura training and Kingsley's letter, which was clear and practical and left no questions unanswered. He thought about Thursday. He thought about Ginny at Hogwarts, in the corridors, in the great hall, under its January sky, in her 7th year, in the middle of her own life. He thought about trusting that. The wireless murmured its morning program. The slow cooker made its steady, quiet sound. The burrow settled around him, warm and organized and continuous, the way it always had been, the way it had been through everything, and would continue to be. A house that functioned because it had always functioned, because the people in it kept doing the next thing. Outside, the frost held its ground in the pale January light. The crack in the wall waited, patient and undemanding. Harry drank his tea.